Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Konrad Gorlinski, and this is the news. Well, commenting on yesterday's decision to approve funds, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki emphasized that Poland is ready to implement the milestones included in the National Reconstruction Plan. According to the head of government, the implementation of the plan is now Poland's raison d'etat. Money will flow to the country as soon as the first payment application is submitted. According to the Ministry of Regional Funds and Policy, this should take place by the third quarter of this year. Successive payments from the EU budget depend on the fulfillment of further requirements. There are 36 conditions in total. According to the Ministry of Funds and Regional Policy, 20 of them have been met so far, and the remaining ones are at an advanced stage of implementation.
Wszystkie pieniądze zewnętrzne.
All external funds, the EU grant funds from the National Reconstruction Plan and the partnership agreements, which have been in place for many years, are needed by Poland even more so today than 6 months ago, than before the war, the 24th of February, when Russia attacked Ukraine.
Kiedy Rosja zaatakowała Ukrainę.
During yesterday's vote to recognize the Polish NRP, the Netherlands indirectly expressed its opposition by abstaining. A few days ago, before the meeting of finance ministers in the Council, the EU warned that in its opinion, the rule of law in Poland did not meet EU requirements. Ultimately, Amsterdam's position was passed. I'm convinced that these funds will get to Poland sooner or later. Of course, I would prefer sooner, but they will arrive, as they're just simply owed to Poland, as they are for any other country that belongs to the European Union. We're just simply owed these funds. Everything that is happening around this is simply just pure politics. Politics against Poland. Resources from the EU fund under the NRP will allow Poland to implement 54 investments and carry out 48 reforms. According to experts, the implementation of these assumptions will strengthen the Polish economy and make it more resilient to the coming crises. Poland is to receive over 20 billion euro in grants as well as loans that will allow it to develop its economy despite the crisis and in the era of energy transformation. Initially, this was about speeding up the transformation of the energy sector, meaning developing more renewable technologies in Polish companies and Polish regions. The main engine of the Polish economy is Polish investment, and the capital that we build here surpasses any amount that we could possibly receive from the EU grants. That's why I feel that the National Reconstruction Plan will not play a major role, even though on the building of various institutions, thanks to the funds, many highly paid bureaucrats will appear in ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Among the conditions that should be met by Poland in order to obtain funds from the Reconstruction Fund, there were also those that aroused the most controversy. They're referred to as the milestones. These are issues relating to, inter alia, the rule of law and the energy transformation. The battle for funds to support the economy after the pandemic lasted for many months. After the European Council in Luxembourg, all doubts on both sides seem to have been dispelled. The first tranche of the NRP funds is planned for the end of this year and amounts to 4 billion euro and 200 million euro. The Russians are continuing their offensive in the Donbass. The fierce fighting for Severodonetsk is still underway. Last night, Russia fired on the cities of Mykolaiv and Kryvyi Rih several times. Rockets also hit the Chemianchuk refinery. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson arrived in Kiev yesterday evening. The head of the British government assured President Zelensky of continued supplies of military equipment and proposed a training program for Ukrainian soldiers. During the past 24 hours, Russians shelled the town of Mykolaiv and its vicinity several times. 22 people were injured. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, visited the town unannounced today. He got acquainted with the current situation and presented awards and decorations to the city's defenders. We are one step ahead of the beginning of full-fledged integration with the European Union. We have a positive decision of the European Commission on the candidate status for Ukraine, and this is an historic achievement for all those who work for the state. It remains to wait for the decision of the Council of Europe, which is to be taken next week. I believe that Ukraine has made all possible steps to make this decision a positive one. Moreover, today I can announce that the Ukrainian paramedic Yulia Payevska, also known by the pseudonym Taira, was released from captivity. She's already home. We will work to take back all prisoners of war. 6 Russian rockets hit a closed refinery and 2 hit a thermal power plant in Kremenchuk. There were no casualties. It was not the first time that the Russians targeted these facilities. In the morning, rockets also fell on Kryhiri. In occupied Donetsk, the ammunition warehouses are on fire again, and according to reports, Ukrainian partisans may have contributed. Russian troops are renewing their attempts to move south from Izium in order to enter the Donetsk Oblast. The city of Slavyansk is preparing for a massive attack by its occupiers, which is expected overnight. The front line runs about 20 kilometers from the city along the Donetsk-Seversky River. A constantly difficult situation also prevails in the vicinity of Severodonetsk. There's still fierce fighting in Severodonetsk. Lysychansk is under fire. Very difficult battles are taking place near Zoloty and Toshkovka. We hear that Russian troops are tired, but for some reason they still have the energy to continue their attack. Together with volunteers, police, and soldiers, we're trying to provide humanitarian aid anyway. We're evacuating those civilians that we reach. This is the so-called silent evacuation. We cannot advertise it because the Russians immediately shoot at the assembly points and humanitarian aid centers. Yesterday, they dropped bombs from planes on a building where people were sheltering. It's very hard. The war is not over yet, but the truth is on our side. After Chancellor Scholz's visit to Ukraine, transports with military equipment were observed in Germany, which, according to assumptions, could be on their way to Ukraine. On the other hand, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson paid an unannounced visit to Kiev yesterday. He promised that his country would start a major training program for the Ukrainian land forces. The training sessions would involve up to 10,000 soldiers every 120 days. Ukrainian military personnel hit the ship Vasily Biech, which belongs to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. This information was also confirmed by the Russian Navy. The ship was carrying ammunition and military personnel to the occupied Snake Island. Since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has already lost 14 vessels, 216 aircraft, over 3,500 armored combat vehicles, and almost 33,500 soldiers. Palestinian militants launched a rocket today at the city of Ashkelon in southern Israel. Tel Aviv then responded with airstrikes on targets in the Gaza Strip. So far, there's no information about possible casualties. Tensions escalated after yesterday's firefight between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians, which left 3 Palestinians dead. There were no immediate reports of casualties in Gaza or Israel, which intercepted the rocket that was launched towards the city of Ashkelon, setting off air raid sirens and setting residents to bomb shelters. Israel said Hamas fired the rocket. There was no immediate response from Hamas, however, nor any claim of responsibility from any of the enclave's other militant groups. In response to the rocket attack, Israel Defense Forces aircraft struck a number of Hamas terror targets in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli military said in a statement. The Israel-Gaza frontier has been relatively calm since May 2021, when Israel and Palestinian militants fought an 11-day war. Although Saturday's cross-border fire did not appear to signal a wider escalation, violence has risen in the occupied West Bank and in Israel in recent months. Just on Friday, June 17th, Israeli troops killed 3 Palestinian gunmen in the West Bank city of Jenin, where military raids have been stepped up after men from the area carried out several lethal street attacks in Israel. Hamas said one of the gunmen was among its members, while another militant group that draws on members of Palestinian faction Islamic Jihad claimed the dead gunman as its own. U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to meet Israeli and Palestinian leaders during a visit to the region in July. Finally, as the 25th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which hosted Chinese leader Xi Jinping, among others, comes to a close today, Russia is ramping up oil exports from its major eastern port of Kozmino, aiming to meet a surging demand from Asian buyers and offset the impact of European Union sanctions. Addressing the plenary session of the 25th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in virtual format, Xi pointed out that the world is faced with major changes. Economic globalization is facing headwinds, yet also underlined that he expects trade between China and Russia to increase significantly in the near future. The economic and trade cooperation between the two countries has made steady progress, as she said, adding that the Hahe-Błagoveszczeńsk cross-border highway bridge has opened to traffic, creating a new channel connecting the two countries. The Chinese side stands ready to work with the Russian side to push for steady and long-term development of practical bilateral cooperation, she said. Moscow has said it hopes to reroute energy exports from the West to Asia, but doing so via long tanker voyages from European seaports is expensive and complicated due to Western sanctions over the conflict in Ukraine. Russia's pipeline monopoly Transneft has already increased the amount of crude pumped into Kozmino on its main Asian oil route, the East Siberia Pacific Ocean ESPO pipeline, by 70,000 barrels per day by using chemical additives to speed up oil flows. Moscow also plans to send an extra 80,000 barrels per day of so-called ESPO blend crude to Kozmino via rail from Megit, a route previously used to supply Kozmino and domestic refineries when the ESPO pipeline was being built. ESPO oil exports via Kozmino are planned to reach an all-time high of around 880,000 barrels per day in July. The EU announced its embargo on Russian oil last week, saying it would stop imports of 90% of oil and its products from Russia by the end of the year. Well, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Please stay with us for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and other programs. But from me, it's have a wonderful Saturday night.